The effects of the war in Iran are being felt far beyond the Middle East, and I'm sure many of you have noticed this in the past week. But there are also questions about what this conflict means for Russia and its war in Ukraine, and that's something I'm going to unpack in a moment with my guest, Ivana Stradner. But before we do that, it's interesting to point out that years of war means Ukraine also has valuable know-how that it can share, like how to fight Iranian-made Shahed drones that Russia's used on the battlefield to devastating effect. Iran has fired off thousands of these drones since the US and Israel started attacking it over a week ago. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has offered to share that knowledge and will send experts to advise the US and Middle Eastern countries on how to repel Iranian drone attacks. He was speaking in Kyiv on Sunday with the new Dutch Prime Minister Rob Jetten. Let's hear some of what Zelensky had to say.
As you all know, countries in the Middle East and the United States have asked Ukraine for support. We will provide them with the necessary means. First and foremost, expertise and the experience of our military in defending against Shahed drones and cruise missiles.
It's great to welcome Ivana Stradner, now a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies Russia program in Washington. Ivana, thank you so much for your time. Now, Ukraine is going to help countries in the Middle East defend themselves against Iranian drones. How is that going to benefit Ukraine?
I think this is extremely important because Zelensky understands perfectly that Russia and China and Iran are working together. And why it matters? It matters because he experienced that axis of aggressors, how they have been impacting Ukraine. To go back to the story of drones, Ukraine has an incredible knowledge how such a cheap weapons can actually have very impactful impact. And he understands, how Shahed drones actually were used also in Ukraine. And now he's willing to use that expertise and to help the United States and America's allies to defend themselves. But to zoom out, we also have to understand why it matters. It matters for two reasons. Number one, drones are extremely cheap. And to intercept them, like right now, think about like Patriot system and stuff like that, it's extremely expensive. So that's precisely what Ukraine has developed, quite, cheap ways of defending itself from such weapons. And the second thing, which is strategic, I think it's extremely important for Ukraine to use that also as a leverage when it comes to negotiations. What we have observed over the past few months, something that worried me very much about Russian attacks on critical infrastructure and Putin's use of ballistic missiles. And really, Ukraine needs more defense on that point. So the argument that the West had, either we don't have capacity to help you, which is exactly why Russia has been working very hard to ramp up that. So Zelensky can also now use his knowledge but also his expertise, to use that as a leverage with the United States to maybe ask American president to help with all the weapons that Ukraine actually needs.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that leverage in specifics. As we know, Western allies have been reluctant to supply Ukraine with the kinds of long-range weapons like the Tomahawk and the Taurus, weapons that could theoretically strike where Russia produces its own military drones, for example. Could this change if Zelensky uses his leverage properly?
So there are two reasons why the West has been reluctant to supply Ukraine with all the weapons that it needs to put Russia on the defensive. Number one is that actually the West is suffering with its own defense, capabilities right now. And the second thing is the fears of escalation. And the second argument is absolutely ridiculous because it's Russia that started this war. and all those fears about Putin's nuclear threat. So, if you provide Ukraine with long-range missiles, we are going to, put our nukes on alert, whatever. This is a psychological weapon that Russia has been using to make sure that the West does not support Ukraine and provide Ukraine with the weapons to put Russia on the defensive. But the first argument is also extremely important. Look, we are entering the 5th year of Russia's full-scale invasion. And I think it's really past time also for the West to put its act together and to ramp up, their also defense sector and capabilities, because make no mistake, this war is not going to end anytime soon. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are working together, and they're more than happy to expand, their capabilities. So the sooner we understand how a new generation warfare operates, the better.
What do you mean by a new generation of warfare?
So the Russian military operates a little bit differently from the Western military. And a lot of people in the West, for a Russian new generation of warfare, they talk about hybrid war. So basically, Russia has a different way of understanding the war. So I'll just give you a very concrete example. What happened recently in Poland when it comes to drone incursion? What happened recently with cutting sea cable across the West, different assassination and sabotage activities? That's a first phase of war, just below the threshold of war that Russia is using to test the West. My concern, we have to think about, always the red team and how Russia might escalate below the threshold of war, somewhere, in the Baltic states, for example, in the future, where Putin might actually challenge NATO, and to make sure the West and NATO will not respond. And that's precisely why we need to think about providing Ukraine right now in 2026 all the weapons that Ukraine needs, so Putin is not emboldened to continue. Because that was in the past testing, and make no mistake, he understands that NATO is very polarized, especially now with what's happening in Iran. He would be more than happy to expand our Western, attention and to see, what's going to stick, which brings me to a very important point. Oftentimes people in the West like to think their adversaries are thinking like them and process information. Putin, his ultimate goal is truly to rewrite a global order, and what he likes to talk about, put forward a multipolar world. How do you create that? In a perception. He does not need to send tanks and jets to any of the Western capitals, whether in Berlin, whether in London, filling the blank, Paris, or Washington, D.C. That's not how he's operating. All he really has to do is to push forward with his new generation of warfare.
Ivana, let's move on to the war that's happening in Iran now. And we've seen Russia benefit, I guess, from the spike in oil prices following this outbreak of conflict. Tell us, though, what are the possible risks to the Kremlin from this conflict? Like, for example, if the regime in Tehran falls?
So to understand and to answer this question, we have to understand that for Russia, this is a strategic partnership. But also Putin deeply cares about his own war in Ukraine, and that's why he did not offer any concrete support. For example, there are numerous reports about Russia providing intelligence to Iran, which absolutely doesn't surprise me. But make no mistake, Putin is not willing to provide any meaningful support to Iran. Now, what are, also the costs for Putin? Number one thing is, I think it's really too early to talk about how Russia will or might benefit from oil prices. And you're right, because on one side, Russia's center of gravity is energy. And a lot of people in the West have been hoping that precisely because of sanctions, that Russia will suffer economically, and that will not fuel a Russian military machine. But here is the thing. I think it's too early to talk about those benefits. You're right about Russian fears related to regime change, because Putin doesn't know, who might go next. And the third thing is reputation also matters, because with friends like Putin, who needs, enemies? Because how Putin behaved towards Syria, what Putin did with Maduro in Venezuela. This is not the first time that Putin is throwing Iran under the bus. What did Putin do when there was a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan? Nothing. And why it matters, it also shows that Putin has its own weaknesses. And that's extremely important to emphasize. Again, we should also not be overly optimistic about this, because Russia still has a leverage when it comes to Iran, and we are going to see how China is going to respond. Why? Because that axis of aggressors, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, have been working together. And my other concern is that Russia tried to position itself as a pillar of stability, offering to mediate. And that's really quite ironic to ask Putin to mediate this conflict. Why? Because it's like asking an arsonist to help with fire. So that's absolutely ridiculous. And that's something that the West should not fall for when it comes to negotiations with Ukraine, because that's something that we should be tracking.
Ivana, there are reports, though, that Russia is sharing intelligence with Iran about targeting US and allied assets. I want to play a soundbite from the Iranian foreign minister, then we'll come back to you.
As far as I know, we have a very good partnership with Russia.
So they are helping you. They are providing intelligence.
Well, they are helping us in many different directions. I don't have any detailed information.
Ivana Stradner, what's your reaction to that? Earlier you said that the Kremlin wouldn't be providing meaningful support to Iran, but that sounds like pretty meaningful support to me.
Well, when it comes to hard power, Putin doesn't have capability and willingness to do that. As I mentioned, indeed, he has been providing Iran with intelligence, and he is going to continue doing that. I have no doubt about that. But we also have to understand that the very first fact that we know about that, it tells us a lot that we can actually intercept a lot of information that we are very much aware of it. So let's see how that's going to unfold. Russia is not, we like to always put Putin on a pedestal that he is a master strategist, but actually that's not always the case.
Does Russia have any other aims when it comes to the Iran war besides potentially helping an ally against an enemy?
Russia indeed is very happy about what's happening with Iran, in large part because Putin doesn't care about his allies. But why he's happy about Iran? Because we are now spending our weapons over there. We are focusing on what's happening in Iran. And Putin is hoping that we are going to forget about Ukraine. For him, this war is a protracted war. He's thinking in long term, and he's hoping that what's happening in Iran, that President Trump is not going to be willing and able to continue to support Ukraine. But one thing that Putin is mistaken, it is that Washington understands very well how Russia, China, and Iran have been cooperating together. So we have to always zoom out and to connect the dots, because we like to think about all those events as separate events, but that's actually not how things operate.
Thank you so much for helping us connect those dots today, Ivana. We've been speaking to Ivana Stradner, Research Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies Russia Program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Big thanks to Ivana Stradner for answering our questions, and we'd love a chance to answer yours too. Please do write us in the comments below. If you'd like to see more of this, then please do hit like and subscribe to the DW News channel.